Marvel's Disney Plus shows have been fun. It's fun to have new episodes every week featuring familiar faces to watch, discuss, and theorize about with friends. But while the shows have had their moments, ultimately I've been kind of disappointed with them. And I think that's in large part due to my expectations. With the expanded format of a TV show, I really expect a more detailed plot, stronger focus on characters, and the utilization of all the potential that comes with focusing an entire miniseries on one or two characters that we already know and love. With great watch time comes great responsibility. It's an investment to watch 6 40-minute episodes, and I just don't feel like most of the shows have made that investment worthwhile. Today I'd like to focus on the most recent show to air, Hawkeye. This is the first Marvel show that attempts to introduce a brand new character that will likely be important to the MCU going forward. And I want to explain why I think they failed spectacularly. If you're a fan of Kate Bishop or the show in general, that's great. I'm glad you enjoyed it, even if I didn't. This is the first primarily negative video essay I'm doing, and I'm not sure how fans of the show will respond, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Spoiler warning for all 6 episodes of Hawkeye. Okay, so is it just me, or is Marvel increasingly using flashbacks in a really lazy way recently? In this phase of the MCU, they're clearly introducing a lot of new heroes and villains, but it seems like they refuse to add these new characters without the audience getting their entire life stories. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but let me explain. You can introduce new characters without flashbacks to their childhoods and how they got their powers. Take a look at Spider-Man. He shows up first in Civil War before getting his own movie in the form of Homecoming. Neither of those stories are traditional origin stories featuring him getting his powers and losing his parents or his uncle, but we as the audience still feel adequately introduced to Peter, and we still care about him. Some may argue this is different because everyone knows the story of Peter Parker. I personally think that doesn't disqualify how well Homecoming functions as an origin story without the use of flashbacks, but for example's sake, let's look at Loki. Loki is my favorite Disney Plus show so far, and that's definitely due to its focus on the development of relationships between characters. And even though the show gives little to no backstory to most of its supporting characters, it still fleshes them out with depth and personality throughout the story. Shang-Chi was an enjoyable movie, but it doesn't do a whole lot with its flashbacks in my opinion. It has a heavy use of them, which I'm assuming means the writers intended for them to function as a storytelling device. But when many of the flashbacks don't deliver new information to the audience, information that recontextualizes the plot happening in the present day, it starts to feel like lazy exposition. Eternal's bloated 2-hour and 40-minute runtime is filled with flashbacks, most of them trying to give background to a host of bland characters and not contributing anything to the conflict in the present day. I think I learned more about these characters in a 2-minute conversation towards the beginning of the 3rd act than in all of these flashbacks combined. You know what? New rule on the channel, we don't talk about Eternals, starting now. Marvel doesn't seem to understand that it's okay to introduce characters without flashbacks to their origins, as long as these characters are written intentionally and with creativity. Unfortunately, Kate Bishop is neither of those. The very first thing we see of Kate is her backstory, and it isn't a very good one in my opinion. It's unoriginal, it's a dead parental figure. It's coincidental too, as Kate just happens to see Hawkeye fighting on a building and decides to model her entire life after him. Let's just be glad she didn't spot the Hulk out there. That would have taken a turn. The audience doesn't care about Kate's backstory because they don't care about Kate yet. We don't know what she's like or who she is as a person. So if the first thing we're presented with is a bland run-of-the-mill backstory, well, let's just say it's a bad first impression. Honestly, I'm of the opinion that Kate's backstory should have been kept more of a secret, and we as an audience should have learned more about her at the same time that Clint did. The reveal of why she became who she did would be so much more compelling if it was revealed in one of the tense conversations between Kate and Clint, rather than in the first 5 minutes of the series. In cases like this, I really think getting to know a character first and then gradually exploring their backstory is a more effective and interesting way to introduce a protagonist. It would allow us to see how their backstory shaped decisions that we've already seen them make. It would sell us on the character first so that we have a desire to care about the backstory as it's revealed. Unfortunately, I don't know if this restructuring of backstory would be enough to save the train wreck that is Kate Bishop. At this point, I'm not entirely sure why the writers expected the audience to like the character of Kate Bishop. They've put her in an extremely difficult spot that makes it easy to root against her. Here's how I see it. We as the audience are going into Hawkeye knowing and loving Clint Barton. We love his personality and seeing him as a father, and Jeremy Renner's performance is just fantastic. We care about him because we're familiar with him. And I personally felt more closely associated with Clint than with Kate, as I'm sure many other fans did. And this is why I have no idea how we're supposed to like Kate. I don't think it's ever a smart strategy to take a new character you want fans to like and make them screw up the life of a character the audience already loves and identifies with. Seriously, it seems like Kate exists to bring Clint frustration and pain. She drags him away from his family into the convoluted mafia plot, she constantly calls and texts him, and ignores everything he says. For someone who supposedly idolizes Hawkeye and wants nothing more than to be his partner, she disregards a surprising amount of instruction and wisdom. I'd imagine the audience is primarily rooting for Clint to get home to his family by Christmas, but Kate is seemingly the #1 obstacle in his way. and she screws up over and over, making his life more and more difficult. It's really challenging to enjoy a protagonist who does that to a character we already care so much about. It seems like Kate's sheer stubbornness is the only thing keeping her involved in the story of Hawkeye. I couldn't really describe her personality outside of that one word either. She's just stubborn and not much else. I didn't find her humor very funny, and I don't remember her ever showing ingenuity or creativity that made her valuable to Clint. They wanted to force our two heroes to work together. I really think they should have given Kate a strength that Clint didn't have. I wish they leaned more heavily into Clint's physical weakness, creating a situation where he needed Kate to help him resolve his issues, like during the phenomenal phone call scene where his hearing aid is broken. But no, Clint is basically in peak fighting form, pulling off all his old stunts. And when Clint does need Kate, she disregards his instructions, making her extremely unreliable and unlikable. It feels like Kate has nothing to offer, and her personality is nowhere near enjoyable enough to justify her presence. I am ready and willing to admit that sometimes the best characters start as unlikable losers that grow and change into heroes. But when I look at the character of Kate Bishop in Hawkeye, I really can't see any growth. Watching Kate face her challenges is like watching a character slam their head against a brick wall until the writers decide that the wall gives up and breaks. She doesn't learn any new lessons or skills, and she never realizes her own flaws or faces consequences for her decisions because they all work out in the end. Some may counter this by pointing out that her growth in the show is about learning to work with Clint, and the show really tries to convince the audience that they end up becoming a great team. But Kate's actions, even in the final battle, really convince me otherwise. After all they've been through, Kate still ignores Clint and makes her own decisions based on her impulses. This is especially evident when she takes down the tree that Clint is stuck in while he repeatedly tells her not to. And of course, it works out fine in the end. Kate really shows that she hasn't changed. She's written so that her biggest weaknesses, her disregard for the advice of Clint and her impulsiveness, yield great results, even in the climax of the show. I can't help but think that a much more climactic and cathartic moment for these characters would have been Kate laying down what she wanted and what she thought was best and trusting Clint's judgment. And because this never happens, the moment when Clint finally calls her his partner feels empty and meaningless. They don't act like partners. Clint has no reason to trust Kate. Kate hasn't learned what it means to be someone's partner. It's a completely forced, unearned, and hollow moment. Hawkeye is undoubtedly a flawed show. It has pacing issues, unnecessary characters that are roped into the plot in unoriginal ways, and a whole lot of wasted potential. Kate Bishop, however, might be my biggest problem with the show, and hopefully I've at least convinced you of why I think that. That brings today's video to an end. Kind of a bummer, I know, but thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you thought down below, and if you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear what you have to say, as well as what you hope to see in the future. Thanks again for watching, and have a pleasant day.